Okay, we're here. We're live. It's Friday. Thank God. Another edition of Green Rush Live. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media. As always, every Friday, I'm joined by... Oh, he did it again. You know, one of these days, David's going to start talking and have his mute off so that when I cue him, we won't laugh at him flapping his gums. But that's a great way to start the show. Hi, David. Now he's doing it on purpose, right? Because if he isn't doing it on purpose, no, David, we don't hear you. But Max Shapiro is with us. And you know what, David? You take the rest of the day off. Go ahead. I'll take over. I'm pretty comfortable with this. Max Shapiro is with us. He is the founder and CEO of PeopleConnect and also the PitchForce, not to be confused with the Pitchfork. Max, how are you? Where are you? And what's going on out there?
I'm great. I'm in San Francisco. I'm in the Bay Area in Marin County, San Rafael to be exact, about a mile away from where 420 actually got started, in front of San Rafael High School. And I was driving by there about a half hour after the time, but it was it's a great place to be. And Jimmy, I got a great idea for you and David and everybody else. If you want to make a lot of money, figure out how that people don't get stuck with the mute button on when they're trying to talk. Get Zoom to put it up where the hell it belongs so it's not hidden, so this doesn't happen.
Wow, it's great to have two comedians on with me.
Well, you're such an easy target, David. You know, it's okay. It's pretty funny. And we knew that, by the way, we knew the mic was on because we heard one of your dogs barking in the background. Okay. So there you go.
Jimmy, to get back to your question, PeopleConnect is a very unique recruiting firm. I say we're the most unique recruiting firm in the world, which is, how the hell can a guy make a statement like that? But it's because we're in our 21st year of business, and about 19 years ago, after the dot-com bust, when people couldn't get jobs and companies weren't hiring, I came up with the idea, maybe we can find some people who will work for equity only, people who will work without a paycheck for 3 months or so until a company raises its seed round or its A round. And we've been doing that part of our business for 19 years. And it's about 20% of what we do, working in cannabis and non-cannabis. And then we also, the other thing that makes us unique is, unlike other recruiting firms that will only place COOs or a VP of engineering, we fill any position anywhere in the world at any level. And I'll give you an example. For a cannabis company in Denver about a year and a half ago, we placed a COO, a VP of sales, and a financial analyst. 3 people at very different levels in different areas. And so it's, I love what we do on the connecting side. I was formerly a scout in the NBA. I scouted for the San Diego Rockets and the Phoenix Suns. And what my team is doing is we're going out looking for people that are superstars, people that are head and shoulders above everybody else. So a little different form of scouting. And then our PitchForce events, we run once a month, where 8 to 10 companies looking for either their seed round or their A round pitch to a distinguished panel of judges and investors, both people from VCs, angels. We usually have 2 or 3 members of ArcView on there, as well as individual angel investors and VCs.
Has Jeff Finkel ever been a celebrity guest of yours?
Jeff has. I just had a Zoom call with Jeff and with Gene Sullivan this morning. I love them both. They're great.
We grew up in the same town. We spent the summer together at camp. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a small world. It's pretty funny. And we have a lot of mutual friends, as you can imagine. And then I will be playing the Do You Know game, but I'm going to wait because I was a sportscaster for 25 years. So you're going to know people that I know for sure. And one in particular, but I'm just going to leave it at that because let's focus on the cannabis thing right now.
Novel concept.
What's that?
Novel concept. We're going to focus this show on cannabis.
Oh, was that a
That's
slam
cool.
on me? How many?
No, not at all. You're the host, Jimmy. I would never slam the host.
I may bring up sports, but I'm not focused on it right now. This is the week of 420, David. And this guy, and Max just said he lives right down the street from where the Waldos used to hang out. That's real. That's history in cannabis.
Max, you just became like in the tight circle of Jimmy's best friends. I don't even get into that circle.
I love it.
And I want to know, is the Louis Pasteur statue still there?
It is.
Why would it go anywhere, right?
Exactly. No, exactly. Yeah.
And do people actually like hang out there? Do they like flock to that? Is there
I
like a
don't think they
pilgrimage?
do anymore. I don't
Yeah, I
think so.
didn't think so. They're all, and those guys are, let's see, 71 high school. So they're 68, probably 69 years old at this point. But I do know a little history about them, and they actually turned out to be normal human beings. Hard to believe, right, Max? I mean, that it didn't rot their brains, as a young person, like a lot of prohibitionists like to think about. Let's talk about PitchForce for a second, if you don't mind. What's the format, and how would someone get involved? And I'm guessing that you have to pick, and then they get to present, kind of a thing.
Correct. So anybody that's interested in presenting could just email me, max@peopleconnectstaffing.com. The format is unique in that there's real world competition. So we usually have 10 companies, and each of those companies sends us an executive summary before that we send to our judges. We have 6 judges at a PitchForce. They're looking at the executive summaries, and we start off with a 1-minute elevator pitch. No questions, no Q&A. After each 1-minute elevator pitch, panel votes on a scale of 1 to 5 how much they like the company. We keep track of the score. The second round, which is really where the value is, we only take the top 5 vote getters. Then those companies do a 4-minute PowerPoint, 4 minutes of Q&A, and about 8 to 10 minutes of feedback. The feedback is direct, it's honest, it's tough, but it's also kind. I've been in a lot of businesses, and I've never been in a business like the startup world, like cannabis, where people are looking to help other people. So, we may not be interested in investing here, but I know somebody who I want to introduce you to. Or, this is a great idea, but you could make a lot more money and attract investors more easily if you license this technology that you have instead of trying to build a whole business around it. So they're really, really smart, caring, as I said, tough, direct, and honest feedback is what you get from PitchForce.
It's a great show. It's a great show, Jimmy. In fact, when we had Jeff Finkel on Friday a couple of weeks ago, it was 2 days prior that Jeff had been on PitchForce.
Aha! Now I get it. That's how you found out about him. Okay.
Yes.
I knew about him years ago, David. All right, you got a question for
No,
Max?
I'm talking
David?
about that's how we got to know Max. But no, Jimmy, you're doing a great job. I'm going to let you keep going. I'm going to give you a little bit more rope.
All right, fair enough. Okay.
So
what's the most? I know I got one for him.
Okay, if you
don't
got
do
one, then
that
go
to
ahead.
me. Jeepers. What is the most unique product? Perhaps something that no one has seen before that has been pitched to you, maybe recently or even over the years.
Wow. There's a company that's using CBD for a lot of vaginal issues.
Yeah.
And
I don't think okay, go ahead.
And it's, it's like for men, it's like, you take back, but it's a very well-run company with a very sharp young woman, and they're having success. All sorts of different types of companies. We did a PitchForce about 5 or 6 years ago, in person in San Francisco. I was a co-founder of an incubator in the Twitter building called Runway. And back then, it was so unsophisticated. These are guys coming down from the Emerald Triangle, which, any of the 3 of us, 1 year out of high school could have done a better job. They didn't know anything about business. But to see how far cannabis has come, the technology, the marketing, the marketplaces, hemp, it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing to see.
David?
So how long have you been doing PitchForce?
Started about 11 years ago, in person. I can remember the last one we did before COVID hit. And that was when they're saying you can only elbow bump. And I'm a warm guy, and I want to hug the people I know. I want to shake hands with people. And it was really difficult, but we made the transition very quickly and easily, as did ArcView, by the way. And so we've been doing these at least once a week, since early in March. And we do a cannabis event every 5th week. The other 4 weeks are non-cannabis. But the beauty of COVID for us has been that by being virtual, we have companies from all over the world. I mean, we have companies from Italy, companies from Israel, companies from Australia, Switzerland, So that's, that's really broadened our reach. And instead of having maybe 20 or 30 people in the audience, we now have 60 to 75 to 100 people, many of whom are investors, which gives the presenters a better chance of getting funding.
There you go. What's the most important thing for a new company before they're ready to pitch?
There's a number of things. I mean, and we train the companies and we've got presenter guidelines that we give them. You said I was talking about 1 minute elevator pitch, and I say you're wincing. There's actually 6 points you can cover, but a couple key things is tell me, what is the why? Why are you doing this business? And in cannabis, more than anything else, so many people, I was suffering with this, I was suffering with that, I was on opioids. Thank God I got off of them. I went, I was depressed. My psychiatrist said I need to take another antidepressants. And this one person said this to the psychiatrist. She tried, she gave him the finger figuratively and went and tried a THC and CBD, and it changed her life. So what is the why? Don't spend 3.5 or 4 minutes telling me about your product and your technology. We get that. Just spend a little bit of time. Here's the problem. Here's our solution. But tell me about your go-to-market strategy. How are you going to market this? The one thing that most investors don't think, most entrepreneurs don't think about when they're making a pitch is WIIFM. What's in it for me? If you're pitching, I'm catching. Think about the catcher sometimes. I want to know if I invest 50,000 or 100,000, if somebody invests $1 million from their fund, they want to know what's the likelihood of their getting a return and when. And don't tell me you're going to IPO, because very few companies are going to IPO. It's going to be an M&A. What kind of contacts do you have with people that might acquire you? Who are those companies? And then, then the ask. And with the ask, when you're setting a price, if it's a price round or even if it's a convertible note, you need to be reasonable in that figure. I mean, we saw a company yesterday that their pre-money should have been 4 or 5 and they were at 8 or 10. And what I tell inexperienced entrepreneurs when they clearly don't have the answer, when I say, are you going to do a convertible or a price round? And there's a long pause because they don't know. I said, look, why don't you try this? Why don't you say, we're just getting started. And we haven't set a price yet. But what I'm trying to do as the entrepreneur is create a win-win for you as the investor and me as the entrepreneur. Let's sit down and work out something that's reasonable.
That sounds like a plan in itself. The only reason why I winced on the elevator pitch thing is I know that I thought the length of the perfect elevator pitch is 15 seconds.
That's a fast elevator. That's a super high speed elevator. 15 seconds.
How many floors? How many floors you going up or down in that elevator? Right.
Depends on where you are. Yeah.
15 seconds allows a follow up question too. A minute, you're at the ground floor. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And that is something I do teach, but we'll talk about that later. David.
Yes, Jimmy. So another question from me.
Yes.
Let me look on my list of questions.
Very good. Oh, good.
Yeah, so what percentage of PitchForce is cannabis at this point?
So it's about 20%. 1 out of 5 are cannabis. The others are not. And we're really running the gamut on companies that are just getting started looking for $500,000, the companies that are looking for $8 or $10 million. We had a company yesterday called Pot and Pans. Great name, Pot and Pans. And what they want to do is create boxes that you order 5 meals or 3 meals per week. It gets sent to you, just like all those delivery services, with cannabis, with CBD now and with THC in the future. Really interesting idea.
We've got one in Massachusetts already, Dinner at Mary's. And the entrepreneur was on the show. God, I can't believe it. It was only 6 months ago. It feels like 6 years ago. As we all know, this has been the longest time of our lives over the last 14, 16 months or so. I do want to ask you about your staffing side of things, even though I think most people are, certainly interested in the pitch and what kind of products and that sort of thing. But because of the growth of the industry, there are now more jobs in cannabis than there are electrical engineers in this country. And there's going to just be more and more jobs as more and more legal states come on board. takes states a year to 2 years just to kind of ramp it up. And then it takes another year or 2 years from there to actually see it prosper, or at least evolve into a more mature industry. What's the ideal candidate for in cannabis? And I'm going to start, I guess, on the dispensary side. Is it a retail background? Is it just someone who has great knowledge? Do they have to take an online course? Can you walk us through someone or something that would be the ideal candidate in the cannabis space?
So first and foremost, cannabis or non-cannabis, we tell our clients, we are not going to send you anybody that doesn't have startup experience. You need to, in the startup world, the joke is, you've worked a 40-hour a week when it's lunchtime on Wednesday. So, people have, and someone said, well, I worked at Cisco for 30 years and the last 3 years was in the small entrepreneurial division, and I get it. No, you don't. So it's got to be, if we're not talking about this hourly dispensary workers, but if we're talking about a COO or a VP of biz dev, or even a chief technology officer, someone has to know what it's like to be involved in the startup world. Add to that, experience in cannabis is a plus for a lot of jobs, but a lot of times it's just, we made a marketing placement for a company, an online marketplace, and they wanted somebody that had great CPG experience. Now, being familiar with the cannabis world certainly helped, but they were open to people without cannabis experience. It really runs the gamut. And you're right. I mean, the number of jobs, the number of companies hiring is just amazing. We placed a CFO about 6 months ago for a distribution company here in Northern California and under our employees without paychecks model. And he's not making a dime until they close on the fundraising that he's leading for the company. And they're just about 45 days away from that. So, all different types of jobs, different levels. If people want to get into cannabis sales and they've been in insurance for 35 years in some staid company, that's going to be tough. But, it's startup experience, having the drive in your belly, it doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, you could be 60 years old and shot your best shot already, or you could be, be 60 years old and have a lot of piss and vinegar left. And you want to go out with one big bang. So age isn't the factor, but drive, motivation is, and experience in working more than a 40-hour week.
Yeah, absolutely. David, you got anything else for Max?
How about 61, Max? What if you get 61 and you haven't shot your last bullet?
You got it. You guys got plenty of firepower. I can see that.
We're pretty passionate about what we're doing, and not just on the 2 hours on Friday that we spend together. The other hours during the week are pretty crazy busy, and it's always kind of remarkable when David and I actually set a time to talk, and we're both available at that time when we set it up maybe a day or two in advance, because as an entrepreneur, just having control of your schedule can be difficult because you're constantly putting out fires. Accurate?
Very much so. Very much so. Yes.
I'm dying to ask you about your scouting. Okay. I just have to ask one sports question, David. Okay. You can put yourself on mute if you want. All right.
No, Max, he won't be able to get off mute if you put him on mute.
That's okay too. No, I'm only kidding. You obviously know the game of basketball from the days when I went and watched Bill Russell play in the 60s. Okay. I got to see Bill Russell play more times live than I got to see Larry Bird play live, except Larry was on TV and Bill Russell was in person. The game has changed from an outside in game to an inside out game. I don't think it's as appealing as it used to be, although the performance that Steph Curry put on at the Boston Garden last Saturday night was one of the most amazing shooting displays in basketball history, as far as I'm concerned. What's your feeling about inside out, outside in?
I love the new game, and I have to just digress for a minute. I was the water boy for the St. Louis Hawks, and I was one of the 13,303 on April 13th, 1957, at the Boston Garden when the Celtics won in double overtime. Bill Russell's rookie year, Tommy Heinsohn's rookie year, when Heinsohn went for 37, Russell made a big shot that won the game.
That's right.
The game has changed. The athletes are different. What Steph Curry has created, he's a generational player. as great a player as he is, I think he may be a better human being. I'll give you an example. He and his wife started a foundation a couple years ago called Eat, Learn, Play. They raised enough money in that foundation where in Alameda County, Oakland is the capital of Alameda County, they served 16 million meals during the pandemic. Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing what he does for the community. And he and his wife are just very special people. And he, you talk about enthusiasm and joy. He brings that to work all the time. And it just, I think those of us who love the game are really lucky to be able to watch him. And that shot in the Boston Garden, that left-handed shot he made from the 3-point line, it was insane.
I'm still laughing about it. When I saw it live, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Really?
Yeah.
It was great. Hey, hey, Max, I could talk to you for hours, but it's 4:20.
Yes.
And that is the time when we take our first break. We explain the Waldos at San Rafael High School back in 1971 used to meet at that Louis Pasteur statue and catch a little buzz after school until law enforcement picked up on it and then picked up on that 420 call, which meant public consumption of cannabis going on. And you better check it out on the corner of Vine and Main Street.
You got it down, Jimmy. You got all the details. That's impressive.
That's it. And by the way, now I'm doing it really fast, but my 420 is this song by Jonathan Edwards. It's Shanty. He performed it at a New Hampshire radio station a couple of years back. And we play it every Friday afternoon because every time I heard Shanty when I was growing up, I followed the Waldos. What can I tell you? Okay. It's been part of my life for a long time. I was allergic to hops, so I couldn't hold my beer. I didn't understand what that meant back in the day. Now I do. That being said, Max, how can people get in touch with you before we take our break? Go ahead.
Max at PeopleConnectStaffing.com. Very simple. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Max, for hanging out with us for a few minutes and putting up with our dog and pony show here a little bit. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about that exciting subject of compliance in the cannabis industry. Don't go away.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just... like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God.
Systems, a world leader in video management security, and by Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
One. Welcome, and we're back.
Look at that. David even took the cue. I wait a second and a half now just so I don't clip it, but that's okay. Go ahead, David. Introduce the people in our room today for Green Rush to talk about this compliance issue. Will you please?
So as many of you know, today's show is on compliance, and compliance is a big deal because that's how you can lose your license. You can get suspended, shut down, and it's the one part of the business that gets overlooked when people are doing their planning. So today we brought in a number of experts. We've got Casey Lever, who is the Director of Regulatory Compliance with Vicente Sederberg. And nationally, Vicente Sederberg is the cannabis law firm. And then we've got our homegrown Blake Mensing, who is the super lawyer for cannabis in Massachusetts. Somehow, Blake, every time I speak, one of the SCs calls me or reaches out to me, and they tell me what's going on, and I say to them, who's your attorney? 30%, 50% of the time at this point, Blake Mensing. You're just like cornering the market around here.
Well, I have been proud to offer a 20% discount to SEs and EEs and veterans since I started my firm. But yeah, I mean, I'll represent anyone who loves weed like I do. And the name of the game is to keep them in compliance with the regulations so the commission doesn't come and wag their finger at you or worse.
Yep. So Casey, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what you do with Vicente Sederberg.
Sure. So what I do is basically take you from a piece of paper, provisional license, to actually being able to operate and then stay operational. Like you pointed out, compliance isn't just putting together SOPs, maybe like a one-time training and make it through inspection process. It is really implementing a culture of compliance and staying open, because something as simple as, not signing a visitor log could result in notice of deficiency and escalate to, worst case scenario enforcement action. So what I do is I'm here for, our clients to kind of ask any operational questions, do training, kind of keep them on the straight and narrow. And what's really, the hard part is just staying up to date with commission regulations, guidance, and the ever-changing interpretations of those regulations.
Now, do you cover multiple?
Wait, you take care of the dog, David.
No, that wasn't even the dog. I don't know what that was.
Oh, well, it wasn't my stomach. I could tell you that.
Do you cover multiple states or just focus on Massachusetts?
Yeah, so my focus, my expertise is in Massachusetts. I do, cover New York, or working on New York and New Jersey as they expand. I've worked in Rhode Island. We do national licensing. So between myself and other members of our office, we do cover every state that has legal or medical cannabis.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, my computer's in
Blake,
a lot
you want
of
to give a quick introduction?
Sure. I'm attorney Blake Mensing. I have a law firm that exclusively represents cannabis businesses. I also have a stake in a retail store that opened about 2 months ago, as well as holding a provisional tier 1 cultivation and manufacturing license with a separate entity, and a couple other irons and a couple other fires. For me, I like to keep my clients and obviously my own entities in complete compliance, frankly, so I have a license to criticize the commission when they do things that are absurd on their face. So if I don't follow the rules, I can't then turn my ire for illogical actions, interpretations, etc., back at the commission. So do my best to keep my nose clean. Certainly don't pretend to be a Boy Scout, but for whatever reason, I've always liked following rules. Makes me super cool, I know, but it's just the rules are there for a reason. Some of them I think are disproportionate to the potential harm, in particular to security regulations. You're treating this substance as if it could actually kill someone when that's biologically impossible. So that's kind of a nod to the federal prohibition. That does a favor to the state, frankly, to have such strict regulations. If we were a free-for-all and anyone and their grandmother could just open up, I think the feds might train their eyes and enforcement efforts here. But because it's so tightly regulated, the feds for now, and I think in perpetuity, just have bigger fish to fry.
Oh, they definitely do. I want to interject here a little bit about compliance. And since you're both familiar with Massachusetts, which is where we originate this program, one of the things that always kind of amazes me when we see a dispensary have an issue with compliance has to do with communicating to the commission about management structure, ownership structure. You're both nodding your head, I can see. So I guess my question is, that's invasive in many ways. If I'm a business guy, it's like, oh yeah, we're doing a merger and acquisition. We celebrated the fact that we did it. And okay, who filed the paperwork? You know what I mean? It's crazy to me that it can come down to that, and then you get fined, a substantial amount. Are they still that particular about the communication, about the management structure and the organization? Blake, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Casey.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of regulatory threshold when you have to involve the commission for a change of ownership is anyone basically acquiring 10% or more of equity, or having some hallmarks of control that the commission laid out in regulatory guidance. Things like the power to appoint a majority of board seats, power to veto major sort of corporate or spending decisions. If it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, they might call you an owner, even if your equity percentage is below the threshold. But yeah, it's I think does a favor to the smaller operators to have those guardrails. Otherwise, you'd have a situation, in other states, they haven't been as sort of careful about avoiding monopoly situations. In California, they'll have multiple licensees stacked on the same property. And here there's a limit on the cultivation canopy and how many license, of each class you may hold. Though I have seen the commission, take some actions, against people who I don't think actually were, intending to violate or skirt the rules. I had one deal where a client got a loan from a big operator. The commission ended up finding the big operator in imputing ill intent to a loan document that was drafted before the commission even existed. So, yes, they should have updated it, but it wasn't like they set out like, we're going to violate these rules. They weren't in existence yet. So yeah, it's crucial to follow the rules. The problem I've seen is that the commission, because they're sort of building the airplane as it descends from the heavens, they don't know their own rules that well. They also take some, liberties with basic English words that offends me to my core. Words matter, use the right ones. Don't use vague terms in a regulatory context. That doesn't do anyone any favors. I actually got into it once with the former enforcement counsel. One of my clients should have gotten a provisional within the 90-day statutory window, and they didn't. And I said, well, what's the story here? And he started to just tell me his interpretation of the relevant language. And I said, I got to stop you. There's nothing to interpret. It says shall within 90 days. There's no debate to be had. And he's like, yeah, you're right. But anyway.
Casey, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Blake said it perfectly. That the hard part about the ownership and control in particular is it's really a case-by-case basis, and making sure you have full understanding of the implications of the individual that may be added, what their role is going to be, what type of oversight they have, even as far as reaching to a parent company. What happens if there's a change at the parent company level? And just making sure that the licensee is aware that this even exists is going to help you tenfold. There are some operators that, of course, they know the regs, but maybe they're just not, maybe they came from another state where the notification requirements and the approvals are really not quite as complex. Massachusetts is, very strict on ownership and control. Their interpretation is changing, I guess you could say it that way. Their guidance somewhat changes, the terminology will change. So you really have to get case by case basis and, be as upfront and I think transparent with the commission about what's going on before you make the decision. Of course, they're always going to say, do the ownership or control application, make the disclosure, because that's the easy thing to do. So if you choose, not to move forward with it, be very confident in your interpretation and your analysis, because you're going to get called on it.
Yeah, and one thing I just piggyback on that, even in the transactional documents themselves, you want to give a nod to the regulator's authority to approve or disapprove of a given transaction. So literally just ending the sort of the punchline would be, subject to regulatory approval. Just that makes the commission feel warm and fuzzy, and that's what you want from them. You don't want them saying you're trying to hide something. Just, hammer them over the head with, we know you get the power to say yes or no here. And that's something that I think they look for.
All right. I happen to know that there's a rule in Massachusetts. Oh, is that for me?
No, sorry, that was me.
That's okay. Because I was like, that sounds familiar. So there's a rule in Massachusetts that has to do with companies or businesses that own both adult use recreational licenses and medical licenses. And I heard one of the principals talk about this a couple of years ago, and I just wonder if they've actually made any changes to that. And that has to do with doing background checks on the same employee in the same building for both adult use and medical. It's the same person, and yet they still had to pay 2 background check fees. And you're both nodding, so they haven't changed that, have they?
No, I hold 2 agent cards for my one facility, and it even goes a step farther in terms of your architectural review form. Same facility, same drawings. They charged me $1,500 twice because it was for a different license. What I think should happen is that your agent registration card should, be tied to the human being, and then that information could be input to the, the licensed holder. That way, especially on the lower levels of the hierarchy at one of these entities, if you're jumping to be a bud tender from here to there, you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs while the state processes the same information, even though you've been vetted and been deemed worthy. So it makes very little sense to me to, I'm sure the technology exists to just say, this person is authorized and this is their active, license that they're in now. And there's no limit on how many agent badges you could have. You could technically be an employee of every licensed entity in the state. What a nightmare that would be, but.
Absolutely. Casey, what's your feeling about that? Same kind of thing.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
It's extremely complicated. And, with the co-located operators, the medical and adult use, medical agent registration is $500. So you have the $500 co-located facility, the medical registration, then you have the $110 adult use. And that's just for one adult use license. So let's say, God forbid, you are co-located cultivation, product manufacturing, and retail in one facility, both medical and adult use. That is an extremely costly, it's a burden for every single person in that facility. And, it's constantly something that I'm actually working on now, because there is a regulatory requirement that says, the agent can only perform the duty which they're registered for. But the investigators have a different interpretation where it's like, well, if you have access to the same vault where medical and adult use product is in, then you need to be registered as both. Even though I'm not touching medical, I'm not performing something under medical, I have to be registered as both, because my point of sale area is a shared limited access area. That's not what the regs say, but here we are. Trying to kind of work through that and convince even one investigator that that's the case. And hopefully, I'd like it to be from the top down, but sometimes you got to hit it from all angles to try to convince them that, this doesn't really make any sense. And it actually doesn't truly align with the regulations, but, here we are. It is a struggle.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I've said, and I think, Blake, you've heard me say this, when people ask me, I'm looking to invest in cannabis, what should I do? And I always say, find a good law firm, because the lawyers are going to make out whether they win or lose. And you get to write the laws and then interpret the laws and then challenge the laws. It's like, hey, no wonder you guys went to law school. I get that part. Okay. What I don't get is some of the injustices like we just outlined on some of these compliances. When are we going to start challenging that? And as you both probably know, in Massachusetts now, there actually is a lawsuit challenging one of the more unjust little fees that has been put in place for this host community agreement, that impact fee of 3% being challenged by a behavioral dispensary owner. Casey, we'll start with you. I'm sure you're familiar with this case. What's going to happen? They're going to go with the letter of the law, or is the law vague enough still that they'll say, you know what, maybe there is some wiggle room here?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to go with the letter of the law because they have to. And this is Blake's favorite topic, so I don't want to take away from a minute of
That's
his,
why I started with you, Casey. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from a minute of his opinion, because I'll tell you, I align with Blake. He loves this. This is like his bread and butter. So I am going to definitely defer to Blake and give him the floor because.
Well, I don't love it. I hate that people can't read or are unwilling to see the words on the page as they're written. I think this sort of manufactured ambiguity around, MGL Chapter 94G, Section 3D on the host community agreement and community impact fee is why people hate lawyers. If you read that paragraph as a human being, you can only come away and say, yes, 3% for impacts that are related to the facility's operation. The impacts that are incurred generate a receipt. The receipt thereof becomes a public record. So all these HCAs that essentially boil down to, oh, it's really hard to calculate the impact. So you agree in advance that 3% is reasonably related. You don't get to agree to the existence or non-existence of a fact. So is there an impact or isn't there? Whether I say there is or isn't, that doesn't manufacture an impact that has actually occurred. So yeah, I think that case in particular, the mayor, is starting to dig his own grave. He said just what I said. Well, they agreed to it. So how can they fight back now? I've also seen host community agreements say, you agree in advance not to challenge this agreement. Well, that smacks of a guilty conscience in my mind. I've also had, attorneys at one of the bigger municipal law firms, the biggest municipal law firm in the state, say to me, if you put a single red line on this contract, my client won't sign it. So the sort of opportunity for municipal abuse, actual extortion, as we saw, was alleged in Fall River. I think that sort of opportunity arose because the Cannabis Control Commission, completely indefensibly, in my mind, has disclaimed their authority to review the contents of a host community agreement. So
my question is going to be, when do we get to the point where the cannabis business owner is no different than any other business in that particular community?
July.
I hope soon. The predictions of doom, tied to cannabis have not come true. You saw the city of Northampton, they realized, they ran the numbers and said, oh, there aren't any impacts, so let's not collect this and treat them like any other business. I know you can't legislate away stigma. So I think that's just what's happening. Also, having represented municipalities, I understand that new and novel stuff is scary because they haven't done it yet. So when you have, the biggest municipal law firm treating this statute as if it's ambiguous and, basically gouging the entire industry, the worst provision, and I think anyone as a non-attorney should be able to understand it. This law firm includes a provision called a reopener review clause. And what it says is if you, operator A, open a store or an operation in a different town, and you give that other town another $1 more than you give our town, you have to come back to the first town and give them that $1. How can you possibly claim that that's related to impacts to your community? You can't, because it's just a way to try to, steal money from people under the color of, oh, we're trying to be responsible for our citizens. You're not even protecting your citizens. Anyway, it gets me worked up.
Casey, you were right. You were right.
It's not an issue I love. I hate it with a burning passion.
I understand. David, you got anything? I know you're looking at the chat room because my computer has now died again. So it's all up to you.
Oh, I happen to, I got to get off from
Get closer to your microphone, David.
I need to get off from adding commentary, Jimmy, to trying to come up with a question, because Blake and I have chatted about some of these cases. I think the Maderi suit, the SJC is going to come down and slam a whole bunch of players and scratch their head and wonder how this has been allowed to go on without anybody actually who's responsible taking a look at it. And then I think Caroline Pinot is going to win hands down. And I think the mayor just by some of the things he's put in writing of, well, we've seen an increase in incidents of depression or whatever the heck he had in there. I mean, great, show us how. They're not going to have it. And it's going to, I think what they're going to find out is they were just throwing crap against the wall. I happen to like those reopener clauses because I think they are so far ahead of the ski tips that there's no way to defend them. How do you defend that because another community has demonstrated that they're going to have higher impacts, that you should have a higher impact fee? Makes no sense at all. But it is so far out there that it's blatant. And I think the agreements are going to get unwound.
Careful, don't hit your microphone, David, because if you
Didn't
hit your
hit the
microphone, we lose your audio.
Okay.
So that was a commentary by David Rabinovitz, basically, as opposed to a question, right?
That was it.
Okay. All right. Is it?
I got too much into it, Jimmy. I'm listening to we got great panelists. I'm like, wow, this is really good.
They are really good. And there are so many other issues out there. I'm actually going to throw it out to both Blake and Casey. What's the one thing that you guys think really does have to change in the laws or some of these regulations that will make it a lot more fairer environment? A lot more fair environment. It's not fair. A lot more fair. It's not a double thing. More fair environment for the cannabis business person. Casey, what is there one in particular that you'd like to see change?
I think because it's on the top of my mind, advertising. I think we've made a lot of positive strides with this last revision of the regs. Now that we can have branded goods, you get your sweatshirts, your hoodies, your hats. You're able to get some brand recognition out there, which is fantastic. But what we're still left with is this, the 85% rule, which, okay, I kind of understand, but with the whole, you need to have audience data, reasonable audience data. It is very, very hard to get scientific audience data, even for the billboard companies. They do have audience impressions, but they do some funky calculations to get there sometimes. And, all it takes is a few local community people to be like, what is this billboard doing above this daycare? Like, I don't care what the audience data says. They're going to stomp their feet and they're not going to like it. It's hard to, advertise and have to drive people to your website to post your price. You can't advertise your price. You can't discount. You can't do customer loyalty programs. I don't know what that hurts in that way. I would like that there could be a little bit more free business competition, because retailers now, without that competition, without the ability to advertise, they can't compete sometimes. We're selling the same products because what's out there for wholesale is the same. Right. So I would really, for these businesses to succeed and, make their mark, I would like to see, and supposedly it's coming, advertising guidance and just a little bit looser, just let, the businesses compete on a level that's fair.
Blake?
Absolutely. I've got two sort of bones to pick. One has to do with labeling. There's a required image with text that goes on every package in the state that says not safe for kids. Well, the Cannabis Control Commission is not qualified to make that value statement. Also, what do you mean by not safe? Cannabis is biologically incapable of killing a human being. So why are you trying to impute, harm that could come from this substance when there's no scientific basis to do so? So I find that, very linguistically offensive. It's sort of this nanny state. I call it progressively puritanical. We're going to let you do something that other states might think is naughty, but we're going to judge the bejesus out of you because you did it. Not safe for kids. Great. As an adult, it's like your liquor cabinet. Keep it away from your children. Keep your cannabis away from your children. They shouldn't be seeing the packaging anyway. And if they do, it's child resistant and really hard to get into. So there are a couple of other gatekeeping other than this sort of prohibitionist era judgmental tone, not safe for kids. I can't stand that one.
And Blake, here's another one. I know you've used this, I am sure. It can save kids' lives. That's the biggest issue here. Right? That's, again, it's like, are you kidding me? You've got to learn about how this product works with the human body. And when they make you do stuff like those labels, it shows ignorance and, to me, lazy. Do the homework. There's a great documentary out there right now called Weediatrics. I'm going to give him a plug because Aaron O'Hearn The producer was on In the Weeds last week or the week before. We just released it. It's up on our YouTube channel. It's all on the PCM network. I definitely recommend finding that documentary because it explains again how challenging it is to be a parent, have a sick child, and have to break a law to heal your child. And by the way, parents will sign up for that like that, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we're all parents. We do it in a minute.
Yeah. The other one in the same vein, the prohibition about using a colloquialism is just, honestly, it's embarrassing. You couldn't call it Georgia's ganja garden. I don't know what they think that would do. I don't understand why the regulatory body, wants to pretend like there's still, a level of stigma that should come from the state. The whole agency is a giant middle finger to federal law. So why are you putting your judgment fueled from prohibitionist, fact-free nonsense on what a colloquialism would be? And then it's also insane to me that they don't even know all the colloquialisms. So there are stores, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but there are stores that are open today that have colloquial names. Anyone who knows anything about weed can say, yeah, that's a slang term, and then they get approved. They actually didn't let me use my intended company name, Holyoke 420. They said, that's a colloquialism. I don't know who they're protecting by not letting us call us that name. It makes no sense to me, again, because anyone who comes into our store has to show that they're of age. So I don't know, it's very bizarre to me.
Well, this goes to some of the ranting that I've done about the fact that you can't, they're not allowing, you forget advertising for a second, public service announcements that are pro cannabis cannot exist in traditional media. So how are you going to beat down the stigma? How are we going to advance to normalcy if we can't share some of the stories that are cannabis saved my life, cannabis saved my child's life, cannabis has changed my life, and everyone in this Zoom room knows we've all heard hundreds of those stories and they're not being told. It's why you guys know, this is why I started this company, because it's like they have to be heard. Lord knows I've always had a loud mouth. It is heard. Okay. Now I've got the damn pulpit to preach on, and I'm trying to give an opportunity to an industry to come on and talk about this because it is so frustrating, especially for the people who have invested not just their time, but millions of dollars into it. And again, who's getting hurt here? Those people that are most impacted on the failed war on drugs to begin with. Right, guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, David. That's your cue. No, you got to unmute yourself, David. Go ahead, David. Now, what did he do now? Did he hit the microphone so that it doesn't work? I mean, do you want to send me a text, David? And I'll ask the question. Make sure all your connections are. There you go. Go ahead. Yes, David. Nope.
Technical difficulties.
No, David difficulties. Okay. No, and we know it is technical, and we all understand that, and that's fine. What are we going to see next? You mentioned the advertising that they're now allowed to brand. Okay, that's great. No call to action, no way to share what one store. How do stores exist? I guess, how are they going to survive? Blake, how's your store going to survive?
I mean, in the short term, while there are only 115 or so retail stores, it's about, who's open. So for now, I'm not super worried about it. Down the road, I think eventually the stigma is going to have to go away. Like you said, you created PCM to give a voice to people to try to destigmatize it. For me, I've been a lawyer for 10 years. I've been a stoner for 24. I consumed cannabis almost every day in those 24 years. I earned 3 graduate degrees. I got married. I have 2 children. If someone wants to judge me and think I'm a lazy stoner, okay. What have you done with your life in that time? It's like anything. You compartmentalize it. I do all my work for the day. I have a little weed at the end of the day to frankly turn my brain off so I don't have to worry about what I didn't do today and need to do tomorrow. It's just sort of a way to say, stop firing neurons so much. I want to watch a stupid television program and just de-stress. So yeah, I think people being willing to say as a professional, I consume cannabis. Again, you can judge me if you want. If that's how you choose to judge someone, I don't know what to tell you. Judge people by their actions, what they say they'll do, and then following up to see that they've done it. I'm a relentlessly honest guy, probably too honest, but that has not one thing to do with cannabis. It's just that both my parents were super blunt people who would tell anyone anything. Oftentimes it got awkward. They would just say what they were thinking, but that's how I was raised, and I'm not going to change for anyone. So
I think they'd be very proud of their son, just saying. Okay. David, have you figured out your audio yet? Nope. So may I suggest, David, that you unplug that microphone? You unplugged it? Okay. Now you have to go onto the little screen where there's a little microphone, and you have to alert the computer that you've actually unplugged it and go back to the internal microphone. No.
No technology. It wouldn't be a Zoom without one of these.
Maybe Dan could call him and walk him through it. That's all right. Oh, wait. Ask Beth. I guarantee you she could fix this. Okay. That's all right. I got this. As you know, I can handle anything that happens in a live show. I guess of course now, I always think of a question when you're talking, but
I've got one more
talking. What? Go ahead, Blake.
One more compliance bone to pick.
Yes,
there was a change in the last iteration and revised set of regulations that now allow quality control samples. What you still can't do is go to a wholesale purchaser and say, here's what we've got. Why don't you try it out and tell me what you think? Like every other industry where something is consumed, someone says, show us your goods. Don't tell me about what the experience or flavor or all these things might be. You just have to sort of trust us. So I think that honestly leaves an opportunity for people, probably to be fooled once. Oh, our product is great. You make a purchase and it stinks. You would have known that if, again, the commission weren't so sort of hung up on preventing people from consuming cannabis, the very thing they're regulating. So I don't understand it, whether it's, cannabis consumption on premises, I get that. But if you can give a sample to your own employees, why on earth couldn't you do that to someone who might be buying, 100 pounds of weed from you, right? It just makes no business sense at all.
No, it doesn't at all. And by the way, for decades and decades, we did kind of sneak around the corner in the back of the building to taste it. I'm just saying, I heard stories about that. Okay. Casey, what any last targets for you that you'd like to see changed?
Yeah, for me, I think that the security requirements are, they're very burdensome and they're mostly just costly. And on their face, sometimes when you read them, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then when you go to practically apply that, it just is insane. I mean, there's dispensaries that have 180 cameras in them just because you can't miss a blind spot. You can't have your hands in a corner above a radiator or, like any sort of machinery in your corner, even though marijuana likely would never be in there, but you can't have that as a blind spot. So you've got to add a camera. There's, alarm requirements, having backup generators, things that are just extremely costly. And when we wanted to, lower the barrier to entry, the social equity programs, the diversity programs came out, the delivery licenses, but the security requirements stayed the same. And I understand that for public safety purposes, but it didn't change how expensive it is to secure your facility. So I would like, not necessarily for the security regulations to change, but just their interpretation and the subjectivity of how you determine what's secure. It's very expensive, and to do it right and to do it in a way that's going to make it through an inspection, not 3 or 4 cameras, it's, 50, 60 average. So it's a lot.
I get you. And since one of our best supporting sponsors, if you will, is Salient Systems Video Surveillance, we think that you should call Ben Shower, their New England rep, because he'll take care of you. He's a good guy. He's a fair guy. He's a friend of ours. And we want to do that. Should we try one more time? David?
Jimmy?
Hey!
That's because you know what I did, Jimmy? Remember the microphone you had me go by? I unplugged it.
Oh, I had you go by it. Right. Go ahead. Yes. What happened, David? You hit it, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I unplugged the thing. So now we're going without the microphone. We'll see how long that lasts.
I just want to correct one quick thing. There is a new definition in the recently revised regulations that covers vendor samples. So I was thinking of the prior iteration. So they do have an avenue now for someone to try the wares beforehand. But yeah, it took long enough. And again, not sure how people were judging their wholesale purchases completely sight unseen before that.
So, hey,
Right.
think about when you go into a supermarket or you go to Costco's or BJ's and they've got the table with somebody standing there saying, do you want to try one of these? And they give you the toothpick, but you can't do that right?
Not during the pandemic either, I might
Right.
add. And it's one of the biggest
True.
issues I have going to Costco is I lost that. That was fun. That's why you went, for crying out loud. One of the reasons why you went, of course. Anyway, Casey Lever, Blake Mensing, as always, I actually enjoy talking to attorneys, especially when they're not on the clock. Even though I had to say that, right? Thank you both for coming on today. You're both welcome at any time that you need a forum to share your views and what's going on in the real world when it comes to compliance issues in the cannabis industry. And we're going to continue talking about that. And David is going to be able to take over the rest of the show after this break. Don't go away. Hi, Jimmy Young here, and I have to ask you, are you secure? If you're in the cannabis industry, you have to have security for your grow facility or dispensary. And we are so happy to welcome Salient Systems to our group of supporters. You get to call their rep. His name is Ben Shower at SalientSys.com. So don't even wait an hour. Call Ben Shower at 413-333-7974.
I really enjoy what I do. There's a couple different reasons for it. First of all, I've always been an accountant, and it's kind of a nerdy thing to say, but I do love accounting. And I also love helping companies. I love helping people build their companies, especially small to mid-sized startups. I've always been someone that's, in all my roles in industry, it's always been building teams, building companies, building departments. And to be honest, I love working for myself and owning my own company. So I love what I do every day.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network. PCM TV is supported by Salient Systems, a world leader in video management security, and by Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
And welcome back to the Friday edition of the Green Rush. And we've got two great new guests to join us. Dina Rollman and Valerio Romano.
And an empty chair. Great. I love talking to empty chairs. It's good.
Right.
So we're going to continue our discussion today about one of those subjects that doesn't get a lot of airplay, compliance, but it is the subject that can cripple your business if you don't pay enough attention to it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Look, there's Valerio.
Yes.
There's Valerio now. That's all right.
So,
all right. Go ahead, David.
Okay. This is usually where Jimmy tells me, you're going to run this half of it. I get about 20 seconds. He jumps in, and then I sit back for 20 minutes. So, Dina, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I oversee government relations for Green Thumb Industries, which is a Chicago-based multi-state operator, MSO, as they're called these days. And I have been with the company since it was founded back in 2014. Have worn many hats throughout the years. So even though I oversee government relations now, I paid my dues for years overseeing regulatory compliance. So sadly, I do have the experience to talk about it today.
Excellent. And Valerio, quick introduction.
Yeah, Valerio Romano. Most everybody knows me at this point. I'm a cannabis lawyer in Massachusetts. Really done a lot of state and local licensing around the country. I'm also barred in California. My law firm is VGR Law Firm. I was co-author of the ballot initiative in Mass that ended cannabis prohibition. And really, what we do is we get licenses on the state and local level. We do a lot of real property stuff and keep them compliant afterwards. I've had the good fortune of working with Dina over the years too. And, they obviously have a fantastic company and I'm excited to be part of this.
Cool. So let's start off talking about a little bit about compliance. What is the area that trips most operators up the most and causes them the greatest grief? Dina, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I would say maybe inventory is like just, as you scale up your operations, it gets harder and harder. When you're sort of a small dispensary with limited inventory, your staff, can handle it. In Illinois, you have to do a physical count of all inventory in the store every single day. So you can imagine that now that Illinois has legalized adult use and the scale of inventory our stores deal with is increased a ton. That means, end of the day or beginning of the day, a full inventory count by hand. It's a lot. And stores are busy all day, returns are happening, errors in ringing people up, et cetera. So it's just, I think it's a lot to keep up with.
Do you find there's a lot of minor discrepancies?
I mean, I think they're always explainable. We operate only in highly regulated states where, we have the seed to sale tracking, everything's under camera, like there literally can't be a blind spot in the whole facility. So we don't wind up with like unexplained discrepancies. It's more just like people make mistakes of like when they were counting, they undercounted one. So when you do the recount, you figure it out. I mean, we're always able to resolve it, but then you're not done with your inventory count till everything checks out. So I think it's a lot of work.
There's not a barcode on every piece of, I don't understand why they need to do it that way. There's barcodes. Valerio, Massachusetts, you have to have barcodes on everything. So isn't that a better way to do inventory?
It is.
But they don't do that.
The metric tags are definitely a big part of Mass now, and it sort of governs the way they do it. And you guys have metric in Illinois also, right?
No, we use BioTrack.
Oh, the state uses BioTrack?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. I think some of the big issues are, bringing, in metric, probably the same for BioTrack too, is bringing inventory into the state control seed to sale system. It can be challenging, depending on how long your particular regulator has been involved. We have that whole sort of immaculate conception issue as to where did the genetics come from, and then how many, what do you bring in, clones or seeds, and what does that look like? So that's always been challenging. Confusion from regulators has been tough too, right? You have like fairly new hires sometimes, and everybody sort of is interpreting the regs differently, and it's sort of like an on the ground decision as to what you're doing and what you're getting. So, and then you got some regulators. Most of these regulators that I've dealt with in a couple of states that I've worked in mostly are largely former law enforcement. They're sort of approaching this with the angle that you're a bad operator, and so they're really, and that's changed a lot in Mass. They've become great to work with, but getting sort of different approach from the regulators. And then, site specific issues I think can be tough too. Door locks that are like, something got screwed up sometime and you're getting an alarm and it's like recurring and it's like it goes to the machine and you're chasing it down. That's been something that sort of happened recently with one of my clients. And then renewals are always tough too for compliance, because at least in Mass, they want so much info for renewals, and just putting all that together can be tough. And I don't know if Dina has the same experience also, especially in Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, as we've expanded and been able to increase our infrastructure at Green Thumb, I mean, we really have a renewal specialist effectively who just all year long is just processing renewals. I mean, we have enough licenses that there's always one that's, needs to be renewed and have to be submitted 60 days before it expires. So it's just an all year long cycle. And it was too hard really to pull any one person to do that and 10 other things. So yeah, I mean, we're getting like more and more specialized within compliance. I would say that's one of the interesting trends I've seen is in my days of regulatory compliance, like it was me. I was the regulatory compliance department. And now there's like a licensing specialist, the renewals person, the this, the that. So it really is like if you're doing it right, it takes a village.
Yeah, and like, and then energy compliance and all that sort of stuff, like if it goes part of the renewals can be tough too. It all take weeks and months to put together. Sorry, David.
No, he's got to unmute himself.
I got to unmute. It wasn't unmuting by the space bar. How many retail locations does Green Thumb have?
I think we have 55 that are open now.
Wow. Holy cow.
More on the way this year. So yeah, it's a lot. Lot of action every day. And it's almost like when you say, what's the hardest part about compliance? It's like just getting through every day at 55 stores without having a problem. That's,
Valerio, and locally here, what would you say is the most, from a compliance point of view, which license class is the most challenging to stay in compliance or has the most pitfalls?
Well, I think getting open, clearly the retailer, let's put medical aside. So medical is that required vertical integration and it's sort of its own beast. But I think the retailer getting open certainly has, that extra step of, the retail ready inspection, ready to sell. But certainly, cultivation and product manufacturing have their own challenges as well. As far as, metric compliance, employee compliance, that's another thing. You got all these employees with cultivation and product manufacturing, you have 15, 20,000 square feet of flower, plus everything else that goes into that 40,000 square foot building, you have, 90 employees, and you got to keep all them happy, even that small amount of flower. So so I would say they both have their own challenges, certainly getting open. But the facility for retail too is also, a lot more compact if it's retail only and like easier to deal with. But you have all these other facility issues related to a big, a grow.
So what would you say are the biggest or most typical compliance trip ups for, let's say, a cultivator?
Well, for a cultivator, I think everything is, the biggest part of it is, employee related. And just managing that whole workforce and making sure that they understand the gravity of being compliant. That's particularly important for a cultivator. And building it out. I mean, the Cannabis Control Commission in Mass is pretty attentive. You want to open a new grow room, they're going to come look at it. And you want to make sure it's ready to go. And sanitation and security and all that stuff are particularly important to them. And I used to complain about it a lot too. I would say, hey, there's so much cannabis everywhere. It's like, what's the big deal? Like, why are they being? But that's what sets the regulated market apart. Is that people expect to get super clean quality product there's an oversight from the regulators to make sure you're not screwing around with pesticides and mold and heavy metals and whatnot that go into. So I welcome it and I encourage it. But that's probably the biggest part. Probably for a cultivator, keeping your environment clean and free of mold and bugs. That's certainly the biggest deal and what set people off and set people back as well. And you see that, with a bunch of different operators in Mass, and just look at the press about it.
Yep. Jimmy, you look like you're about to ask him something.
I can, if you'd like me to. With
Go
all
ahead.
these compliances, with all these regulations, are people still making money in this business right now?
It's not the regulations and compliance that keep people making money. It's 280E. It's the feds. It's
Gotcha.
The margins that go away with the federal tax obligation and the ability to deduct regular cost of goods sold. Any business has look, security's tough, right? There's this sort of idea. I'm all about restorative justice. I think that's a huge goal of this. And I think it's incredibly important. This idea that you're going to get even this new sort of delivery license that's available in Mass, right? Like this wholesale delivery they used to call the new delivery license. It's still $750,000 at the low end to open that license all day long. They think it's some vehicle for. So anyway, the biggest issue with the margins and making money is 280E. But then 280E goes away. What happens? The prices come down.
That's right.
Right now, wholesale flower in Mass is $4,000 a pound. It's incredibly high, right? I mean, you pay that.
The highest in the nation. Isn't that the highest in the nation?
Dina would know better than I would about that, probably.
I don't know. I really don't.
I think we're neck and neck with New
York's gonna
Jersey
be
Medical.
higher.
Yeah.
New Jersey Medical, I think, is pretty high.
But you know, you're competing with that, but then 280E goes away and everybody's sort of a race to eat up that margin. And, you know, and like, are they going to still, I don't know. And, you know, this is, I've written some applications and worked with Dina over the years, and I'm sure that 280E has always become sort of a frustration when you're working with investors and everything else. But CGI is such a good company. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we always talk about how we're effectively trying to, you know, grow and scale a company with one arm tied behind our back. You know, 280E is that does have that big of an impact for sure.
David, do you want to give the definition of what, tell people just in case they don't know what 280E is? I know you're very good at this, so I'm setting you up.
Thank you, Jimmy. 280E is a single 77-word sentence in the Internal Revenue Code that states that all you can deduct is cost of goods sold. So if you know what an income statement looks like, instead of paying taxes way down on the bottom on your net income, you pay taxes based upon your gross profit. So you don't deduct all the standard deductions that most people do in any other type of an industry. So it's a very punitive type.
Did I see that Harborside? I know Harborside's challenging this, aren't they right now? Steve D'Angelo's old, well, he's still like the chairman emeritus. Are we challenging that all the way to the Supreme Court?
They lost.
They lost in California, right? Or did they lose in? They didn't get to the U.S. Supreme Court.
They're fighting it in tax court, and I believe they lost. They lost the most recent round again.
Yeah.
I don't think the United States Supreme Court has picked up a 280E case. I certainly would probably have been dreaming about that and reading about it if that happened. Unless, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they haven't done that.
Right. No, they got stopped at the altar. I think they never got out of federal court in California because they couldn't advance that. Are we going to see again, guys? We're all looking at the crystal ball. You hear different things. The cannabis advocacy groups are interpreting what Jen Psaki says at the press conference the other day about, you know, the priorities for the Biden administration. Is it really cannabis reform? Are you going to live up to what they had said they would do on the campaign trail now that they're actually in office? It's not an easy thing to do. And it does seem like that Senate, the bipartisan Senate there, everybody's digging in their heels. Are we confident that they're going to move this forward? You know, they have the Safe Banking Act, and now the Democrats are trying to get DC as a state, maybe even Puerto Rico too, just to kind of pad it a little bit. I mean, I cannot believe that cannabis is right in the middle of this fight. That's where it keeps. Dina, you understand, right? I mean, it's just incredible to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's definitely an interesting time for sure. So many different pieces at play. You know, I don't know. I think it's nothing happens quickly when it comes to the federal government. So this idea that, you know, SAFE was going to pass tomorrow, like, no, I mean, I think we're getting closer. You know, forget MORE Act, States Act, like nothing is happening quickly. And I have to say for Green Thumb, like, would we like to see those advancements? Absolutely. Are we doing okay without them? We are. So we sort of, I get asked this kind of like every day, like, what's happening with interstate commerce? What's happening with SAFE Act? And I'm like, all of these developments would be great. But we sort of like stay like head down and focused on like, well, this is the status quo right now.
Right.
It's keeping us busy. It's workable. It's not great. We want change. Don't get me wrong. But like, we don't feel like change is imminent on any front right now.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It's sad. I mean, we'll have Michael Correa on, I hope, in a couple of weeks. He's one of the lead lobbyists for the NCIA in DC. And, you know, he talked about low hanging fruit. And of course, the lowest hanging fruit is actually a bill that has passed not once, not twice, not three times, but now 4 times in the House, the Safe Banking Act, and goes nowhere. Valerio, are you confident at all that now might at least move it a little bit to the point where Schumer's group may add a little caveat or an amendment to that to perhaps even get rid of 280E in addition to the Safe Banking Act?
Well, if SAFE went through, 280E would be gone. That's part and parcel to SAFE.
Okay.
Right? We wouldn't have, and so we could like if Safe went through. But the thing is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I love watching Jen Psaki. I think she's awesome. I love her little bit of sort of cynicism to the ridiculous questions she gets from some of those reporters. I think she's just fantastic. But she did say it, and we know that Biden is not the most. I mean, look, we came from a non-progressive administration before, but Biden's pretty old school, right? I mean, you don't get much more centrist than that guy. And I don't think he's sticking his neck out there for cannabis. It's not going to be a legislative priority for him. You know, the thing about Safe and really getting rid of 280E is if you deschedule or reschedule and you get rid of 280E, what that does is it brings more investment into the states. So you have more access to cannabis. These larger grows, particularly on the East Coast, where it's $6 million to build out 30,000 square feet, you get more investment in. So that means more product, and medical especially, so more access for patients. It brings the price down. So you just get better cannabis and more access to it for the market, right? So that's like the main thing. The other thing about the Biden administration is Kamala Harris was the DA when I became a lawyer in San Francisco. She was the head prosecutor, right? And so I did criminal defense when I was out of law school for a few years. And she straight up tried to lock up my friends for growing cannabis. And then no guns, nothing like, no sales to kids or something, just growing pot at your house in the sunset, like old school nothing, and so that she's not exactly, champion of justice for cannabis and bringing the plant into the world.
Right.
So those are kind of like my thoughts on what the feds are going to do. I mean, I think as far as I can tell, and Dina might know better, I mean, it seems like Safe is got the best chance of going through, but what's it going to happen, right? So if it gets through the House, right? Then we got the Senate, and then we got Joe Manchin, who's going to he has to be the most important guy in the room, so he's not going to endorse it, right? So then you don't have even 50 votes, and then are they going to filibuster it, which they probably are? So we have a whole problem in the Senate, and then even if it gets to the president's desk, is it even going to get signed? So. Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in the next 18 months that we're going to have a rescheduling of cannabis, but I'd love to hear otherwise.
I understand that. And then you've got these polls that are coming out now that 69% of Americans favor legalization. And so I do think that there's more public pressure being put on the elected officials, but it's so difficult to take that poll and actually get action at the federal level. I mean, it again, and that's only the people that have been enlightened about the positives about cannabis, right? Because there's still a lot of people.
Relief, favor infrastructure, right? I mean, we have the majority of Americans favor stuff, but there's a certain side of the Senate that simply won't do it anyway, right? I mean, they favor gun reform. I mean, it just sort of is what it is. Sorry, Jimmy.
No. It's quite all right. It's quite all right. I was actually going to turn to the media here. The media actually did go after Jen a little bit this week. A couple of New York reporters kept pressing her on this issue. And, I when I hear that, I'm happy because I think a lot of the media people just kind of, oh, it's that weed thing again. Oh, it's the stoners. They're just as guilty as everybody else is. And I do want to bring up media, Dina, to you, because if I remember correctly, it wasn't too many weeks ago that Green Thumb was the subject of some journalism in Chicago that perhaps you would be willing to talk about or not, because as I remember, it was much ado about nothing as it turned out.
Yeah, I'm not interested in delving into it. I guess all I can say is, media story based on unnamed sources. No validity to it. Ben Kovler came out strong with a statement against it, and
it's kind of gone away, hasn't it?
Yeah. Unless people keep bringing it up.
Sorry, I would feel remiss if I didn't. Bring that up. So, and like I said, I really do think that sometimes the media does things just for the sake of a headline, and that does bother me.
Clickbait.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clickbait. I learned the definition of that this week, and it was Dan French. I'm going to give him credit for defining that for me. Now I understand it. To me, headlines, right? It's headlines. Okay. But I get the new term now, much more. All right. David, unmute yourself. I'm going to put you on the spot again. Unmute yourself, David. There you go. Go ahead. Ask a question. Come on, you can do it. They're right in front of you. Ask a
Is this
question.
part of your guys' like shtick? Is like the way you guys like interact?
This just, you can tell. This is Valerio. This is, this is the end of the week. So if it's a good week for Jimmy, he's nice to me. If it's a bad week, then his significant other thanks me because I get to take all the abuse before he goes home.
She can handle herself. Thank you very much. Go ahead, David. You got anything?
Go ahead. Go with your next question, then I'll jump in.
No, I think the next question has to do with state versus state. We've got Illinois, and we've got someone who's had certainly national exposure. Are other states learning from the experiences of others at this point? So, Dina, are there things that Massachusetts did that Illinois either is staying away from or is embracing?
So what we're beginning to hear is that state regulators are talking to each other behind the scenes. There's an association that's been formed of state regulators in legalized states. I don't know how often they're meeting. They're not sharing a ton of information about what they're up to. But I think there's also just a lot of informal phone calls that happen as a state is, like New York, as they were trying to get their adult use bill right. They absolutely were calling Illinois and learning what Illinois did well and what it didn't do so well from a regulator's perspective. So I think things have developed a lot more than they had 5 years ago, where there's a little bit more of a small community of these state regulators. It is, if we kind of go back to where we started here on compliance, kind of like what can make us all crazy in this industry is like, there's no uniform set of laws in this industry. It really is state by state by state. And even if it's just the rules around how you track inventory or dispose of waste or something simple like that, or, who has to get badged and who doesn't, states like to kind of put their mark on it, approach it their own way. So they borrow from each other, they talk to each other. But I would definitely say there's no state I've encountered that's like, copy paste, we're done here. Like there's a lot of attention to kind of customizing each state. So keeps lawyers like Valerio and, compliance attorneys and regulatory attorneys all over the country really busy because there is no one size fits all. Oh, now that I know Massachusetts, I know, you don't need me in any other state. Like, it's like, you have to put in the time in every state. But it's getting better, maybe, I think.
Well, I think the more experience everybody has, the more different cases they have, the more we learn about what works and what doesn't work. And I mean, even a state like Colorado just introduced delivery, which to me, it's like they've been doing this for 10 years. They never talked about delivery. Yeah. Valeria, you have experience in Colorado, don't you, a little bit?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of work there. VS, where I was before, obviously they started in Colorado. I haven't done a lot of work. Delivery is notoriously sort of hard to roll out, right? Some of the regulators in Mass, we had 4 of the 5 first regulators who voted against cannabis. Some of them were very adamant about not doing delivery. One of them recently left the commission, and she was very against delivery. State versus state, like New York grabbed, a lot of Massachusetts rules as well as Illinois rules. But like, if you're thinking about like fundamental stuff, right? Unless you're either existing medical or one of these sort of micro type licenses in New York, vertical integration is prohibited, right? And then like in Mass, vertical integration is permissive. That's a really fundamental like thing, right? It's like, and like if the states that are borrowing from each other can't get along or even agree on that sort of fundamental approach to the law, it's sort of interesting. So and then like the no uniform laws is like, I think it must be really tough. But these regulators in the states, they like to have this responsibility, I think, right? I mean, spending time putting this all together instead of sort of rolling it out with some federal model. We couldn't even battle COVID with a unified response in this country. How are we going to legislate cannabis?
The one thing I'll say is that I learned the hard way actually in Massachusetts. We were trying to get our cultivation facility approved for adult use, and I went out. We were meeting with the inspector, and she was insisting on some interpretation that I thought was just off base. And I said, well, in Illinois, and I got shut down real fast. Like, honey, you're in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Like, I don't really give, a rat's tush, like what they're doing in Illinois. So, I've learned to kind of mind my words and sort of, I might be getting a nice global perspective these days on what's happening in every state, but that doesn't mean that every regulator actually wants to hear from me about what else I'm seeing. Like, some do, some don't.
But this is the value of having people like Dina and the other GTI folks and in sort of some of these trade associations that are particularly in the emerging markets like New York right now. I mean, they haven't picked, their board, they haven't picked the, advisory board, they haven't written their regs. Like, to the extent that we can have people with Dina's experience, across the country helping to shape this new market, right? It's gonna be the biggest regulated market for cannabis, like in the world, probably, and like having that sort of influence on it, I think would be great. So maybe a mass regulator who doesn't even agree with the regulator who came in 15 minutes before her doesn't want to hear about what's happening in Illinois, but I think like a new market, when they're putting it together, would love to hear from you.
I hope you're right. I'm not so sure. We'll see.
One of the things that keeps coming up in new states that are looking at legalizing is actually keeping track of the THC percentage in the plant and then actually putting a tax if it goes over a certain threshold. Dina, what's your opinion about that? I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, when Illinois was legalizing adult use, they put that in the bill, and our trade association was like, that's crazy. It's such a overly complicated and really misguided approach. And I actually was kind of offended from a policy perspective, because it really was a way to kind of deny the fact that people use high THC products for all kinds of reasons, not just to get super baked. It's like people who are dealing with like massive pain need like a big load of THC to get out of bed in the morning. And like, it's really a medical use. So like, kind of, how dare you tax people more just because they happen to have a higher tolerance and need more THC. So we tried very hard to get rid of that. And they justified it as a policy reason that they felt like they were kind of scared by the high THC level of like concentrates and things like that. And that this would like incentivize people not to use concentrates. And then we're like, oh, okay, so you want to incentivize people to smoke joints. Like that's where you want to go with this. Like, you guys are like not getting it. So we tried to kind of make the policy arguments, educate, talk about incentives, everything, and like lost that battle. So here we are.
Valeria, what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I absolutely agree, but I also like see sort of the devil's advocate side, working with, lots of growers in Mass and in California too, some, and then just the other clients across the country that I've had over the years. There's a lot of thought where you just sort of like, if you're spending all this money on a grow and that people are chasing high THC at the retail level, right? Like the highest tax, like people are chasing at the retail level. And so then you just like only think about that, right? And you're not thinking about growing quality cannabis. So I'm not sure that the tax that New York is considering and the other plant in Illinois, are using based on THC is necessarily, appropriate. But if it was thought of as a way to offset like just the fact that, okay, fine, I'm going to spend all my square feet on growing the highest potent flower, and who cares about like, the rest of the plant, and that might add some value to it. I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead, Dina.
I mean, I would just say the market tells us that there's a real diversity of customer wants, right? And so absolutely there is the kind of like typical recreational demographic that's like just absolutely, they're just scanning the menu for the highest THC level, and that's their determination. Yeah. But that we look at as like a more less sophisticated way to approach your experience per se. And customers are getting more sophisticated and more knowledgeable, and they're like, well, how much CBD is there in there? Because I like that balanced effect. And what are now we're starting to talk about terpenes instead of just THC levels. So I feel like the conversation's evolving where a lot of customers want a lot more information than just THC level. They're buying off more than just THC levels. So like, it's just not, I just, I know we're in a highly regulated industry, but I'm like, just because they're regulating us doesn't mean they have to like regulate to that level. Like they can regulate to make sure there's not diversion. I don't, I'm a mother of teenagers. Like, please don't sell to minors. Like, great. But like, they don't tell beer makers, kind of what percentage alcohol to put in their products. Like, why are they telling us? Like, we don't, so I don't know.
I love the alcohol analogy because they can't win. You can't win on that one. Alcohol is a much more dangerous substance than cannabis, but the stigma still is so much stronger on the cannabis side. It's like the smell of cannabis. It's pungent. Okay. It's that same kind of a thing. And I am concerned about that because if you understand how it interacts with the human endocannabinoid system, it isn't about how much THC. It is the combination. It is the steering of the terpenes that dictate the intensity of both of those chemicals. And by the way, they're still learning about new cannabinoids in this plant and discovering them every day. So even the people that think they're experts, even the scientists out there, they're learning every day on this too. So trying to convince legislators about this, I mean, you talk about knocking your head against the wall. Yeah. Lobbyists, I can't imagine being a lobbyist these days when you walk in and you have to deal with people, let's just say from states that aren't necessarily as enlightened as the two that are represented here. Yeah. Okay. And one in particular, that's south on the Mexican border. I just want to say, without really naming which one it is, it's a really big one though. You know what I'm talking about, Valeria. I know you do. Come on.
I realize, I do. I thought about the power issues and the cold weather that they had some weeks ago, and it was tough.
Well, it's a good time to go to Mexico if you're an elected official, right? Oh, because my daughter asked me to go. Whatever. Yeah. Whatever. I digress, and I don't think we want to turn the.
But I do think if you're using the alcohol model, which I think is somewhat valuable, and so some of the state regulatory and compliance and licensing issues that come up, one of the things is this sort of distribution license that exists in some jurisdictions and not in others, right? California has its distro license, Mass doesn't. I know frequently the alcohol lobby wants to have like a creative distro license and have sort of an exclusion on it, an exclusivity on it. That's certainly what happened in Mass when we were rolling out our law. And I'm wondering if Dina's had to deal with that and how that affects, sort of the vertical integration component and applying for that license separately and all of that, because I certainly deal with that in California some with clients there.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because, we're very supportive of efforts to, diversify the industry, create, lower barriers, to entering into the industry. And a distribution license is great for that, right? It doesn't have to be a high cost license. And so legislators are looking at distro licenses, to promote social equity, and can be great. I think it's kind of almost an issue for another day. They're just complicated in terms of the pros and cons. And, the intent is there to make those a sort of good entry point. Illinois created a category of transporter licenses in their most recent licensing round. But it's just not clear that the demand is going to be there because producers can also just handle transportation themselves. The volume of what we are delivering these days in a typical delivery has really gotten, quite large. So unless these transporters have, large size trucks, maybe not so useful, but then you come to find out that Illinois in its adult use law actually prohibits use of larger trucks and says you can't use trucks that require a commercial driver's license.
Oh, that's not bad. Wow. I mean, that's still a pretty good sized truck before you get there. You're talking about a 26 to 28 foot box truck, which that's before you get to a CDL.
Okay. So I don't know. I haven't seen enough yet of how this plays out to really feel like I get the nuances of it yet.
So when you're saying a distribution license, you mean a company that's going to buy from manufacturers and cultivators and in turn resell to retailers?
So it can mean that or not. So we sort of in the industry, we call that kind of like there's like the Amazon model where you're effectively, right, you're purchasing wholesale from licensed cultivators. You have your own warehouse where you're storing it, and then you go direct to consumer home delivery. Right. Which is retailers are not a fan of, right? Retailers have invested millions of dollars in their storefronts. We go through an exhausting zoning process every time we want to open a dispensary, in terms of where we can locate and what hours we can operate and everything, and put in the, security system that's required. Like, I mean, soup to nuts. It's like, we all know it's quite the undertaking just to open one store. So you make that investment of time and money. And now there's this distributor license that can just basically locate in any industrial area, have a warehouse, and go direct to consumer. It really can negatively impact existing retailers. So I think a lot of existing retailers aren't a fan of that model. That's different than what we would call like the transporter model, which is really just a courier service. It's just, a driver taking from point A to point B on behalf of the producer.
Right. So in Massachusetts, 2 years ago, they put a minor tweak in one of the regs, and we actually have the ability to have distributors who are going to buy product on a wholesale basis and resell it to other marijuana businesses.
Yeah, it's a third-party transporter license, and I've been able to get a couple of them. And the thing about these, sort of what they're supposed to be lower barrier to entry licenses, whether it's transportation or ideally distribution, the problem that you have with them is if you have to have a brick and mortar that's secured, you're spending a fortune. I mean, it just is what it is, and maybe not for sort of the fantastic sort of multi-state operator like Green Thumb, but if you're trying to just sort of get entry into the industry and you have to secure a property for a year, you got to build it out, secure it, literally, and then buy wholesale product. And you're still, like what I was talking about earlier, at $750 million, on the low end all day long, and it's still not, $50,000 to get into the business. And as far as I know, in no jurisdiction is there a license that really works for the restorative justice sort of social equity, despite all the lip service that's paid to it.
Yep.
Are we starting to see the MSOs actually recognizing the issue that they have? Is there a way to incentivize them in any capacity to create more opportunity for the social equity applicants, for those who have been most impacted on the war on drugs? Are we starting to see a change? I mean, at some point, the MSOs, I would think, are going to say, you know what, we really ought to be doing more of the right thing than just making money.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to talk about everything Green Thumb is doing, but I also want to say we're not the only MSO that is really, evolved their practices to really have this be a primary focus, and when I say it's a daily topic on trade association calls, I mean it. It is a daily topic, whether you're talking about New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, PA, Ohio, every state. You can't really get through a conversation about anything going in the industry without talking about it, right? And everyone is, I would say, trying different avenues for how to tackle it. So Green Thumb, last year we formally created a corporate social responsibility department. Have 4 identified pillars of things that department is working on. One is social equity, but what we talk about a lot is that can be a bad scenario if you effectively outsource social equity to one department of the company, right? Then it makes it almost siloed and everyone else feels oh, that's the CSR department's job to worry about social equity. That's not my job. And we're no. It's formalized so we can track things and have a strategic vision and approach and day-to-day kind of execution. But, it's the social equity piece is on, very much on supply chain. Hey, are you guys tracking, we contract for millions of dollars of goods and services every year, whether it's services within our, facilities or just legal services, millions and millions of dollars. So are we tracking how many of those contracts go to, MBE or WBE, women or, minority owned businesses. When we look at our recruiting, I mean, we added, what was it? I think we added 1,000 employees in the last year, some like crazy number like that, right? So for our, talent acquisition team, it's like, hey, what are you doing to diversify our ranks from top to bottom? What are the slates of candidates look like? Are you making sure that like just every job we hire for that they're, we're considering diverse candidates and prioritizing diversity. So like we're working hard to kind of like delve like into the infrastructure. So it tentacles out in every spot, not just as like a PR campaign, external thing, it's got to be kind of it. So I won't, we do a lot of local work, but like we're balancing all that external site specific social equity work we do and donating money and all that with honestly, the much harder part is the internal and trying to like build that equitable infrastructure. And we are not there yet. I don't think any MSO is, but it's like the most kind of like imperative goal right now.
And I think actually opening up the communication alone is a good step. Recognizing that there's an issue is another good step. There's so many issues with race in our country right now. And I do see more and more people at least attempting to talk about it. Yeah. And that, to me, as a talk show host, that's a really good thing. So we really want to continue that conversation. Valerio, what's your feeling about the whole social equity movement and diversity in the workplace and the challenges ahead?
Well, I'm a huge supporter, but I'm sort of, even though I'm a big white guy, I'm a lefty from San Francisco, like to the core. So but as far as GTI, I was fortunate enough to work with GTI when they were citing their cultivation in Massachusetts in Holyoke. And I know they had job fairs and they made a real effort to hire thoughtfully, right? And that was like, the promise of the local community. And they did it too. So I've always been a big supporter of the way they approached the rollout of that larger staffing need in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, I'm saying thank you. Nice to say. So thank you.
I was really stoked that was the approach, and I toured that building and it was so much effort to get that building in a condition where you could actually grow in it, it took so much time, and like the regulators were coming through different parts and they still made the effort to think about like hiring responsibly. And it's awesome. And I think the thing that I've noticed with MSOs, particularly in Massachusetts, and I haven't had, I've worked with MSOs in other states, but more tangential, like sort of peripherally. In Mass, virtually all the MSOs were like interested in funding, other companies that were smaller operators, diverse, restorative justice, social equity, economic empowerment type operating. Even there's different words that mean different things, but the restorative justice operators. And really, what happened in Mass, and it's sort of a shame, is the Boston Globe and the Cannabis Control Commission, chase that money out. They, you already have 3 licenses. We're going to overly scrutinize any deal that you have funding somebody else who's going to want to get in the market, whether it's small grow or large grow or delivery license or retail. I know every single MSO that I worked with, and it was like pretty much all of them, with the exception of maybe one. They were really interested in putting money in these other groups, and it was and none of these deals were beyond what was commercially reasonable for a cannabis loan or a cannabis deal. Nobody was taking advantage of anybody. And in Mass, we had this whole thing where that MSO, like sort of the multi-state operator money that was going to go into these folks who were like trying to get in the industry, just got chased away, and it sort of really hurt, clients that I was working with that were just sort of looking to get funded and didn't have any money otherwise. And I've done these meetings and sort of not getting paid for them because I just wanted to get like the good stuff to work. And so I think that, there's this idea, particularly if you read some press in Mass over the last few years, the MSOs are just sort of evil big, bad guys who are just approaching the industry. But I have never had that experience ever. Another way to talk about it is like the host community agreement thing. In Mass, like, there's this sort of notion that MSOs are willing to pay anything for a host community agreement, and so that excludes like the smaller operators in that municipality. I have never had that experience either. Nobody wants to pay more than they have to the town. Like you give something to charity, but so I've never got into, I've never seen that where these larger operators were the bad guys. It's just never been my experience. I've worked with a whole bunch of them in a whole bunch of different municipalities, in a whole bunch of different capacities. And then finally, sort of to follow up, it's absolutely critical that, thoughtful hiring be more than just, a couple paragraphs in the employee handbook, right? It's absolutely has to be like, ingrained in the thoughtfulness of management. And it needs to actually really be reflected at the management level too, and until that happens, no matter what companies do, it's just not, you can do all you want to do like sort of a CYA by getting your HR person to give you a few sentences to put in your book. But until you actually incorporate it, across the board in your company, it's just not going to be a reality, but I don't think that's something that's particular to MSO. It's sort of the reality, of most places. So that's sort of my 2 cents. But to summarize, I've never seen one of these MSOs operate as a bad actor in any jurisdiction I ever worked with them, ever. Never.
That's a statement coming from you because you've been around a while, Valerio. This is not a new thing for you, and you've seen, right. Well, you've seen the growth of the industry. I mean, literally and figuratively, and we're at a point now where more and more new states are coming on board, and at some point, one state's got to get it right from the get-go. Now, I'll tell you what, I think Arizona was able to turn it around faster than any other state. They just basically said anybody who had a medical license could do recreational. And it just made so much sense. And the next thing sales are going through the roof and everybody seems to be happy. Is that the right model, Valerio?
I mean, I think so. I always had, so we co-authored the ballot initiative. We squeaked by with like 3 points, in 2016. But we had all these medical regs already, right? We could have taken those, loosened up the things that didn't have to exactly do with patients and caregivers, and made it for adult use regs. Instead, we spent a couple of years rewriting the rules, creating new regs, doing all this stuff. We could have just flipped the switch here too, And then you had this sort of priority review for medical operators. But, what did that help? Like 12, 13 of them? It wasn't like the whole thing would, we just went gangbusters the next day where you could just flip the switch to adult use. So I mean, I don't know enough specifically about Arizona. I do know that sort of idea and the fact that like they were able to flip the switch quickly. I don't know.
Illinois did it.
Illinois did.
Illinois did.
What I was thinking of, not Arizona, it was Illinois. Yeah, that's who did.
Yeah.
So
Arizona did it too, though, but Illinois did too.
But Illinois, really like, in a highly regulated market went from, in legalized adult use in end of May of 2019. And the governor said, okay, well, we're going to launch sales and adult use sales in 6 months. We were like, a little aggressive, a little fast, going to be busy, but okay. All right. If that's what we got to do. And so everyone just hustled. So what he didn't really factor in was zoning. So he might, the governor and the legislature were like, great, let's just launch adult use on Jan 1. Then you go into all the towns where you have medical dispensaries and they're like, yeah, not so fast, like we're not going to have this done for you in 6 months. So not every location got to flip the switch by Jan 1, but lots of them did. Most of our sites were able to flip the switch Jan 1. And it was like, same product, you're just selling it to more people. Like we don't have to overcomplicate these things,
I was doing a story this week for We Talk News, which, by the way, does follow this live broadcast. We have the regular weekly news show that comes up after. And Florida is an interesting thing. First of all, 500,000 medical patients in Florida, 272 medical dispensaries. and their recent initiative to move it over to adult use legalization got shut down by the state Supreme Court because of some verbiage, guys. Now,
permit. The word permit can sink a ballot initiative. One word, permit.
Valerio, you know about writing ballot initiatives, right? And it happened in Nebraska too. How, again, who are the attorneys that are writing these things? Haven't they learned yet?
Well, was that MPP in Florida?
Florida Supreme Court is the one. Yes, it was.
Was it Marijuana Policy Project? I don't know. I don't know.
Was it?
Floridian for they had 500,000 signatures to an 800,000 goal, and it was Floridians for Reform. It was one of those.
That was the advocacy group. I don't know if it was MPP. I know that MPP, like when I've worked with them, they do such a bang up job. I mean, they have so much experience drafting these things. Like when we did it in Mass, we had all these fantastic ideas about what we wanted to do with the law. And Heather, who was like writing the law from MPP, she was the real drafter who was like, I've done this so many times. Just give me your input and I'm going to make this thing right. You know, like we just couldn't squeeze it all in because she knew like single issue rule stuff and like just all the different things you have to do to make these laws like palatable, you know. And then the other thing is if you're doing it via ballot initiative, you know, you have different issues in different states, right? In Mass, the state legislature, so what they could do here, the state legislature basically rewrote our ballot initiative substantially. I mean, out of the box, they said that they're going to delay the whole rollout and that growing cannabis isn't agriculture, right? So they just like substantially rewrote our ballot initiative right out of the box. That was like the first day they did it, and then they actually rewrote the whole thing. In places like California, where you have an initiative process, like the voters will trumps, and the legislature can't substantially alter a ballot initiative. So I don't know enough about how it passed in Florida, but I suspect that, you know, instead of letting the court strike it down, the legislature could have hopped in and fixed it, you know, and maybe they still will. But maybe Nina, I'm sure GPI's got a presence there, you know, and you must know more about it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but then you get into a thing where, you know, how much is it, the drafting, how much is it the view of the courts of adult use? You know, it's, yeah, but this one is really could be a very simple fix. I mean, essentially what the court was saying is you're misleading voters because you're not really being clear that even if Florida legalizes adult use, it remains illegal under federal law. And they just want that to be clear. So it's a simple fix, but as I understand it now, it's like back to the drawing board, collect another, you know, 500,000 signatures. Like it's now a 2024 issue.
Was it permit versus permit? Is that what it was? Seriously, was that simple?
You attorneys with your words, and God, we love you all because of it, and there are challenges with that too. I understand too.
Yeah.
Dina and Valerio, you guys, as usual, terrific conversation. Dina, first time we've talked with you, but we really do watch Illinois. Michigan and Illinois are our two favorite Midwest states right now.
Oh, okay.
And you know, for me, I didn't think to me the Midwest begins after Worcester. So you know, it's just the nature of the beast being in Boston. I think Valerio understands all that too. I do. And yet I still love the Berkshires. Okay, let's just cut to the chase. I don't want to think that I'm dissing on the western part of my state either. We all know that it's been an incredible journey. We're all part of history here, and the compliance issue is not going to go away. And obviously that keeps our friends in the law business in business. So we appreciate your time here on a Friday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us during our Green Rush live segment that we do every Friday with me and David Rabinovitz. David, you want to have any closing remarks here?
No, Jimmy, this has been a great, you guys, well, let me start with Dina and Valerio. You've been great panelists. Valerio, you're always a superstar. Dina, hopefully we're going to have you back on again. Sure. This was, you know, an interesting topic, and I think one that we covered pretty well here. So thank you.
I think
Thanks so much for having us. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much. It's great.
We will do it again. Keep waving the flag. Remember, our We Talk News program follows this webcast as well. So a reminder again for David Rabinovitz, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis. It's a whole new world of weed out there, people. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
up on Weed Talk News this week, it's the week of 420, and more weed was sold and consumed on that day than any other in U.S. history. But before you celebrate the beginning of the end of prohibition, President Biden's press secretary repeated that administration's policy towards weed, and it was a guarded response. Illinois set another sales record for the month of March, and the Kahuna Cannagar makes its debut in Massachusetts. So how much weed can you fit in one joint? How about a full OZ? On Weed Talk News, next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Please bear with me this week. I'm still dealing with the effects from my second shot for COVID and a little foggy from 420. How about you? So were you part of that history on that special day of celebration of cannabis? Did you know more legal weed was sold on that single day than in any other day in the history of the United States of America? Of course, with more states going legal every week, that record will continue to be surpassed year after year. Last year's total was $172 million. Pro Cannabis Media was on location at Revolutionary Clinics in Cambridge, Mass. And the green nurse, Sherry Tutkus, joined me at the top of the live show. Then we checked in on 5 other dispensaries all over Massachusetts as more people bought more product that day than ever before. Exact sales figures are still being tabulated, but don't be surprised if it surpasses $200 million in one day. Here's Deborah Borchardt with the Green Market Report. Deborah?
I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report with the business rundown for Weed Talk News. What a huge week for 420. Headset said it was processing $60,000 in sales a minute. Planet 13 reported it had done over $500,000 in sales on Tuesday, and Air Wellness said it saw $1.24 million in sales on April 20th. So great day for these cannabis companies. It was a big week for Jushi Holdings. The company announced that it was buying Nature's Remedy of Massachusetts in a deal valued at $110 million. Jushi also bought Ojai Grow, one of 34 licensed cultivators in Ohio, in a deal valued at $5 million. Jushi said it was unable to deliver audited results this week, but it did deliver some unofficial numbers. Revenues increased 30% sequentially in the fourth quarter to $32 million. For the full year, Jushi said revenues increased 690% to $80.8 million. Parallel, one of the largest privately held cannabis companies, said it was making a $25 million investment into a new state-of-the-art cannabis cultivation facility in Texas. Texas has a very restrictive medical marijuana program, so this looks like they're just planting their flag for the future. And those are the big news stories for this week.
There continues to be some mixed signals from Washington, D.C. on cannabis reform at the federal level. The White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, was pressed this week by a number of reporters regarding President Biden's administration campaign promise for decriminalization and expungement of records of past cannabis possession convictions. Now, Psaki stated, quote, "The president supports leaving decisions regarding legalizing for recreational use up to the states, rescheduling cannabis as a Schedule II drug so researchers can study its position and negative impacts. And at the federal level, he supports decriminalizing marijuana use and automatically expunging any prior criminal records." Now, he also supports legalizing medical marijuana. For more from Washington, D.C. and these comments, here's Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams. Phil?
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News D.C. report. Will President Biden sign a legalization bill if and when it reaches his desk, or will he veto it? For the second day in a row, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki declined to say one way or another. When asked at a press briefing on Wednesday if the president would honor his campaign commitment to release nonviolent cannabis offenders and expunge their records, Psaki responded, quote, "What you're asking me is a legal question." She said she would have to, quote, "follow up with our legal team." On Tuesday, Psaki demurred on the legalization question, saying, quote, "The president supports leaving decisions regarding legalization up to the states." Earlier this month, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told Politico he would make his case for full legalization with the president, but went on to say, quote, "At some point, we're going to move forward, period." And while Schumer is telling us a legalization bill is coming soon, another key Senate figure is saying not so fast, at least with regard to the Safe Banking Act. Banking Committee Chairman Sherrod Brown of Ohio has been tamping down expectations for quick passage of the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, which passed the House earlier this week. Brown said he's currently focused on other priorities, saying, quote, "This committee's been too much about Wall Street and not enough about housing, not enough about rural and urban affairs and people's everyday economic lives." 3 new bills introduced in the House this week are aimed at making cannabis businesses eligible for federal assistance. The first is the Ensuring Safe Capital Access for All Small Businesses Act, introduced by Nydia Velasquez of New York. That bill would ensure access to small business administration resources, such as disaster relief and loan guarantees. A second bill, sponsored by Dwight Evans of Pennsylvania, would provide federal grant funding to cannabis businesses and remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. Finally, H.R. 2649, introduced by Jared Golden of Maine, would prohibit service providers who partner with the SBA from denying resources to businesses solely because of their involvement in cannabis. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Delivery services in the U.S. are not making any friends in the vaping and CBD community. Next week, the U.S. Postal Service will stop delivering any vaping hardware or parts for vaping devices, including chargers. Now, New York City-based Green Angel CBD is suing that city and FedEx over a hemp shipment from 2019 that was originally mistaken, identified by the FedEx driver, and then seized by Vermont police. Now, after realizing their mistake, the police apologized and sent the shipment on its way to New York, where Oren Levy was waiting for the delivery. So were the New York police, and they arrested and held Oren for 24 hours before being released and having all those charges dropped. Now, Green Angel is suing FedEx and New York City for creating a media spectacle of the confiscation and publicizing the event on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Needless to say, the city and FedEx have denied they did anything wrong. We've still got a long way to go before normalization. Meanwhile, we go to New Jersey now for the New Jersey Report with our own Tara Masu. Tara?
I'm Tara Masu from Blazin' Bakery, and this is the New Jersey Report for Weed Talk News. Today, we had New Jersey's second meeting of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, who will be the group that establishes the rules and regulations for New Jersey's adult use cannabis program and takes over the medical program from our DOH. The number one thing that was stressed today is lab testing, and that is because right now we cannot simply meet the demand of our medical program. So once adult use is grandfathered in, we will never be able to process and test the cannabis products in a timely manner. There's been reports of edibles, which have to be tested and sold within 30 days, giant batches being disposed of because they were not able to get through our labs in time. The solution they have found for this is that they will be able to use interim testing standards adopted from another state so we can start implementing these immediately while the CRC develops regulations. This is going to be a huge help in speeding up expansion. The other points that they said were most asked about were submitted by New Jersey residents, and those were home grow, would it be allowed, making medication more affordable and accessible with our limited number of licenses, how to get an adult use license, and how many licenses would be awarded. While they didn't have answers today, they did say an FAQ page will be posted shortly that will have answers to these and more common questions. So people will be able to look to the nj.gov website for more answers soon. Finally, they did address that home grow is not something they have the jurisdiction to actually handle because it was not given to them in the legislation, but there is a home grow bill going around to address it. So if you want home grow, now is the time to contact your legislator. Similarly, much of the parts of the micro license, such as the caps on sales and square footage, are baked into the legislation. So that will have to be addressed legislatively as well. I'm Tara Masu for Blazing Bakery, and this has been the New Jersey Report for Weed Talk News.
The state of Florida has a pretty robust medicinal marijuana market with over 500,000 card-carrying patients using 272 dispensaries around that state. Now, you would think that would be the first step towards legalization and adult use. Sure enough, there was a ballot initiative going on in that state that has just been shut down by the Florida Supreme Court because the question being asked wasn't clear enough and therefore unconstitutional. That's a big setback for the Make It Legal in Florida reform initiative. No such issue in Illinois, where that state just set a new sales record. Margot Vaselli has the Illinois report for us. Margot?
I'm Margot Vaselli from Margowana with this week's Weed Talk News Report from Illinois. Representative Ford just suggested a new way of approaching the social equity license rollout that's been delayed since last year. Rather than hiring a new company or relying on KPMG to score everything again, why not create a whole new process, he suggests. The legislation would create a process that would award the 75 licenses to the tied applicant group, and the 21 winners of the 2020 application process would be limited to 10 licenses each. And we know that Illinois hit over $100 million in sales last month. What we are finding out is that 69% of those sales were from in-state residents and 31% of those sales were from out-of-state residents. What factors could have helped drive those sales is definitely the stimulus check and the warmer weather and people getting more comfortable after being vaccinated. And there's also a new drink in town called Canna. It's infused with 2 milligrams of THC and 4 milligrams of CBD and has 3 unique flavors: grapefruit rosemary, blood orange cardamom, and lemon lavender. That's the Illinois Report. I'm Margot Vaselli from We Talk News.
Our regular Canadian contributor, Solomon Israel, is on assignment this week, so we look at the future of the Canadian market through the data analytic company Headset, who has just released a study of comparison of the U.S. and Canadian markets. In Canada, sales projections for this year of 2021 is $4 billion, while here in the U.S. it will reach $23 billion. And keep in mind, it's still illegal on the federal level here. Headset goes on to conclude that the Canadian market will advance twice as fast as the U.S. over the next 2 years. Michigan remains in the United States, and Rick Thompson has his finger on the pulse of the cannabis business in that state. Here's Rick Thompson.
It's time for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Apparently still experiencing a hash-bash wave of euphoria, Michigan's governor joined a movement to push the federal government to legalize cannabis on a national basis. Whitmer joined other state governors in advocating for the passage of the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, which would lift legal limitations on banks and give the green light to federal institutions and the stock market that accepting cash from state legal cannabis entities is permissible. She made the announcement Tuesday on 4/20, our high holy day. Whitmer wrote this in a tweet: "To be blunt, legalization is great for the economy." This isn't the first time Whitmer is advocating for better cannabis laws. The governor took time out to record a message for the 2021 virtual Hashbash broadcast on April 3rd, as she's spoken at previous Hashbashes, and embraced cannabis legalization as a platform in her 2018 campaign for the governor's office. Well, Michael Thompson is 70 years young. That's right, the man who was released from prison in January of this year is now 70. There was a time not too long ago when Michael envisioned he would die in lockup, alone and behind bars. Now the man has his own condo, his own car, his own career, and a national recognition as a symbol of what can be accomplished when right-thinking people actually try to fix the evils of the drug war. I was fortunate enough to join him at his home on Monday and at a private party on Sunday. And I can tell you that he's in great spirits, and he certainly doesn't act like a 70-year-old. He's preparing to tour the Genesee County Jail to speak with inmates and administrators. Other released prisoners flew in to meet with Michael at his birthday party. The cries for prison reform grow louder. Maybe real change is at hand. And that's it for the Michigan Report. I'm Rick Thompson with MICBD for Weed Talk News.
Not to be forgotten on this Earth Day celebration of 50 years of climate awareness, we go to one state that has always been green. It's Vermont. Here's Vermont's green nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan. Jessie Lynn?
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. On 4/20, a statewide cannabis education program for nurses and medical providers was launched. 2 nurse associations combined their efforts to offer a nursing and medical professionals curriculum on the therapeutic use of cannabis. Both the American Nurse Association, Vermont, and Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association are working together so the information will be the most up-to-date and evidence-based information on how the endocannabinoid system and the Vermont Medical Cannabis Program works. This program combines Radical Health's online comprehensive cannabis curriculum with live interactive Vermont-specific panels. Panel speakers include lawyers Tim Fair of Vermont Cannabis Solutions and Laura Subin of Vermont Coalition to Regulate Marijuana, physician assistant Paul Gerard with Vermont Cannabinoids Clinic, and me for the Vermont Cannabis Nurses. We're excited to help Vermont medical professionals and nurses start and expand their cannabis education and advocacy. Speaking of advocacy, today is Nurse Legislative and Advocacy Day in the Vermont State House, where legislators will be given the call to include nurses on committees in policy creation and as leading educators. For 19 years and counting, nursing is consistently named the most trusted profession, and nurses want a louder and larger seat at the legislative table to advocate for themselves and their patients. Vermont legislators will be asked to include nurses on the Cannabis Controls Advisory Board for the state's medical and adult use programs. Vermont is positioning itself at the forefront of cannabis technology, led by St. Michael's College professor Ari Kirschenbaum. The psychology professor and cancer survivor received a grant from the National Science Foundation and has created a free mobile app that uses gaming exercises that measure cognitive impact, designed to quantify their high. The app, called Indicator, not to be confused with Indica, creates a baseline test score that is acquired while sober. Users can gauge their cognitive functions while high. Indicator measures their focus, reaction time, and impulse control. Kirschenbaum is now going after a $1 million research grant. If awarded, it will allow researchers to test Indicator in a controlled setting at medical schools across the country, surely putting Vermont at the forefront of cannabis technology. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
And finally, after interviewing hundreds of medical professionals, entrepreneurs, and scientists, I think I've seen it all and heard about it all. But I have to admit, I've never seen anything like the kahuna. Now, with all due respect to our Hawaiian friends, that's with a C, because this kahuna is a cannagar. On 4/20, a dispensary called Nova Farms released it in their Framingham and Attleboro, Massachusetts dispensaries. It's 14 grams of cannabis, and amazingly, there's another one that's a full OZ in one joint. Like my old friend Groucho Marx might say, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. That's Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Hi, Jimmy Young here, and I have to ask you, are you secure? If you're in the cannabis industry, you have to have security for your grow facility or dispensary. And we are so happy to welcome Salient Systems to our group of supporters. You get to call their rep. His name is Ben Schauer at SalientSys.com. So don't even wait an hour. Call Ben Schauer at 413-333-7974.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.